Okay, we are going to look at the end of the First World War today. And the big question I want to answer is, why did the Central Powers lose? Now, as every time, we'd like you to take notes. Again, we'd like you to try and use mind map notes. Obviously, if you've got a better system, that's also fine, but mind maps are great. What I'd like you to do is, there are three questions we're going to answer, which will allow us to answer the main question. The first, why did America join the Allies? Why did the Russians lead the war? And how did the Allies win? And for each one of these sub-questions, you want to put reason one, reason two, which will help you answer the sub-questions. And once you can answer all the three sub-questions, you'll be able to answer this main question. Why did the Central Powers, and most importantly, why did Germany lose the First World War? So the first big question is, why did America join the Allies? Now, this is really crucial. America, during the First World War, was a big, powerful industrialization nation. Most importantly, though, America had lots and lots of people. And you'll see later, American soldiers finally joining the war in 1917 are what ultimately makes the difference to the Allies winning. Now, there are three reasons basically why the Americans joined the war. The first one is about submarine warfare and the sinking in particular of a ship called the Lusitania. And then the next big important reason is a telegram called the Zimmermann telegram. And we're going to see how that strongly influenced America's joining the war. All right, so between 1914 and 1917, America isn't exactly neutral. It supports the Allies. It sends over the Atlantic Ocean weapons, supplies, and food, but it doesn't fight. So it's not sending soldiers. Now, this is important to bear in mind. I'm going to take a little detour to talk about what was happening at sea during the First World War. Now, Britain has the world's most powerful navy by far, the best ships, the most ships in 1914. And it uses all of these ships to blockade Germany. So it stops Germany from importing food, but really, really crucially, raw materials, things like iron, which it can use to then make weapons, or cotton, which it can use to make clothes and uniform, but also food, so it can feed itself. Now, this blockade is really effective. There's food shortages and famine. That's the Ete is the court, and there's Hungersnot in Germany, and in fact in lots of parts of Europe because of this blockade. And the Germans realize that they're not going to starve to death, and most importantly, they're not going to be able to get enough materials in order to carry on fighting, then they're going to have to do something about the blockade. And this is when it gets to U-boats and submarine warfare. So Germany may not have as many ships as Britain, but it has a lot of U-boats, these submarines here. And these are very, very effective at attacking and destroying ships. Now, at the beginning of the war, submarine warfare is mainly at military ships. So ships in the British Navy, ships in the French Navy. However, soon, U-boats begin to target non-military ships because the calculation is these non-military ships are carrying supplies, weapons and guns and things like that, which help the Allies fight. Now, this is understandable why the Germans did this, but it's a problem. In 1915, they sink a ship called the Lusitania. Lots of people die, but most importantly, 128 Americans die. And it starts to make people in America think that actually their enemies might be Germany. It might be worth fighting. But nothing happens for a couple of years until 1917, where Kaiser Wilhelm and the German military decide that they are going to have unrestricted, unbeperkt submarine warfare. That means that their U-boats, their submarines can torpedo anything if they think that that is a ship which is bringing anything to help the Allies in the war effort. Now, this is where the sinking of the Lusitania is so important, because people in the American press start saying, well, remember what the Germans did there. Americans are being killed at sea. We've got to do something about this. And this unrestricted submarine warfare led to a lot of people saying, well, maybe we should join. Now, this became much, much, much stronger with something called the Zimmermann telegram in 1917. So a telegram, in case you don't know it, was kind of the precursor to an email, but it was on paper. So it was a way of sending a message to people. And someone in America got hold of a telegram between Germany, and Mexico. And in the telegram, Germany was apparently seeking to make an alliance against the United States with Mexico. Now, anyone who's listened to Donald Trump speak over the past few years knows America and Mexico have a troubling relationship. But what the text of the Zimmermann telegram seemed to say is that Germany, if Mexico joined the war and attacked Germany, and this was not such a crazy thing, America and Mexico had actually been at war the previous century, and there was quite a lot of tension on that border. But the idea was, if Germany and Mexico get together, Mexico would be able to claim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona from America. Now, whether or not this was true, whether Mexico would have accepted or not accepted, it was the thing which finally convinced most people in America to say that they were going to join and support the war against Germany. So in 1917, America declares wars on Germany and now begins to send troops to Europe. All right, hold that in your mind. We're going to skip over to the other side of the world now, to Russia. 1917, you have the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia. Now, this is a huge topic, and I'm going to do this very, very, very briefly. But basically, the First World War did not go very well for the Russians. Tsar Nicholas, who you can see up there, was not a particularly competent commander-in-chief. The generals weren't particularly good. The Russian army wasn't very well equipped. And the Russians suffered huge losses, not only in soldiers, but also in civilians, non-soldiers. Around 2 million Russian civilians may have perished in the First World War on the Eastern Front. Now, this, of course, made Tsar Nicholas extremely unpopular. And in 1917, a group of radical communists, led by a guy called Vladimir Lenin, took power in Russia in a revolution, starting up a new communist government. The Tsar and his family were captured and murdered. And this is not something you have to worry about, Russia then spends the next several years engaged in a rather brutal civil war. For our story, what is important is that the new communist government say to Germany, we don't want to fight anymore. They give up some territory here in yellow, and they sign a peace treaty with Germany, which means now Germany only needs to fight on one front. They can send all of their troops who were previously fighting in the east, they can send them over to the west. And so in 1918, the Germans say, right, all of these troops, they throw them into a huge attack on France and on Belgium against the British, the French, and the Americans. Now, this nearly works. The Germans get very, very close to Paris, as you can see. But it doesn't. The spring offensive fails. The Allies have just enough troops, just enough weapons, just enough tanks to stop the Germans. Now, this means that the German soldiers are, of course, exhausted, and most importantly, they're not in their trenches anymore, so they're now out on open ground. Finally, when the Allies start to push back, it's possible to then start taking territory. And basically, because the Americans in the war, the Allies now have more troops. This is what it comes down to, and this is why it was so important that America joined the war. But because Germany, because of the peace with Russia, because they have thrown their entire army at here, they've basically now exhausted their army. Germany's allies now say, okay, enough's enough. They stop fighting and they seek peace. And the German military, many want to just carry on. They never want to surrender. But basically, civilians in the government force them to. Now, one of these soldiers who thought that Germany should not have surrendered was Adolf Hitler. So, spoiler alert, this is going to be really important when we get to the Second World War. Nevertheless, on the 11th of November, 1918, Germany surrenders. They end the war and there is armistice, the Wapenstillstand. Kaiser Wilhelm flees to the Netherlands, where he lives until 1940, and a peace treaty is signed. Again, spoiler alert for World War II, it was signed in a train, and this particular image is going to be a symbol of German humiliation that Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party are going to later use to justify how they came to power. So why did the Central Powers lose? 3 reasons. So why did America join the war? Basically because many in America wanted to join the war. but it needed unrestricted German U-boat activity to convince them this was a good idea, coupled, of course, with this Zimmermann telegram and worries about war with Mexico. So how did the Russians leave the war? Well, they had a revolution. They were sick of the war, it was going bad, and they just destroyed their whole government. They got a whole new communist government, which we'll be talking about next period. This meant that their troops came over to the west for one huge final offensive, which they lost, leaving them exhausted and unable to carry on fighting the war. Theory. Learn beats 10 to 12. Basics 7, 8, and 9. Projects 4. That's what we'd like to do. Projects 4, by the way, is only if you have time. It's about the Russian Revolution. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Any questions, ask your teacher.